We'll reconvene after that short cupcake break. If we could take our seats in the room, please, and welcome back to members online. We will now go to item 9, and this is consideration of a private plan change request in Patumahui South. And the reporting planner here is Sanjay Bangs. And we also have our GM of Plans and Places, John Dogood, with us as well. I'll go to John Dogood in the first instance to introduce, and then we'll also hear from Sanjay. John.
Kia ora koutou, councillors, members of the Planning Committee. So just introducing the item, it's another private plan change request. We've received quite a few of the last couple of years. A number have come to Planning Committee, but more latterly we have been exercising staff delegations to make the decision to accept private plan changes in cases where they're not raising strategic issues. However, this one, as with the Drury East private plan changes, does raise some strategic issues. So it relates to a rural settlement to the southwest, or to the west of Pukekohe in the south, Patumahui, an attractive village in the south there, so just northwest of Pukekohe, as you can see on the map. The private plan change proposes to rezone some rural zoned land immediately next to the existing village for housing and some business use, with some land to be rezoned future urban as well. So it's in the order of some 30 hectares of land. On our analysis at this stage of the process, we, in looking to whether the plan change should be accepted, adopted, or rejected or treated as a resource consent, our recommendation is to accept this private plan change and allow it to go out for submissions and off to a hearing. Having said that, we do feel that there are some significant issues here that need to be addressed in a council submission. The land has highly productive soils. There is debate between our own expert and the applicant's expert as to whether those soils are classed as elite, which is the top class of soil, or prime, which is also very good soil, but not as high quality as the elite soils. And so the unitary plan has a different approach to prime versus elite, but overall the unitary plan does have a strong signal to avoid where practical either of those soils. So there's a pretty significant issue there that needs a detailed merits assessment in our view. There are some detailed planning policy issues to work through, and there are some technical issues around how much of the land is actually prime versus elite or other soils to work through, and what that all means in our view is not the level of assessment that's appropriate at a accept, adopt, reject stage, whereas you'll recall we need to stay at the course level of assessment and leave those sorts of matters for submissions, evidence, and hearings panel to determine. The other strategic issue is growing a rural settlement. There is some policy support for that in the unitary plan, but it's certainly not a given that rural settlements should be expanding, and there is already some land immediately next to the village here zoned for expansion, but not yet developed. So there are some strategic issues there in terms of the growth of settlements that need to be worked through, in our view, by the hearings panel. And lastly, as with any development in the south, there are the issues around transport infrastructure. So commuters from Patumahui heading north will face many of the same challenges, or all of the same challenges, as those living in the Pukekohe area and in the south generally, and in the Drury area. So those strategic transport issues will be of relevance to this private plan change application. So we're recommending to accept, just to recap, but to make a submission so that the hearings panel clearly has the scope to look at whether this plan change should actually be ultimately approved, or approved in some amended form. So Sanjay just has a few more slides to run through, and then I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you, John.
Sanjay?
We'll go to you, Sanjay.
Thank you, John, and good morning to councillors and members. Not sure if it's Duncan that has control of the slides. If we can skip through, yeah. So this map shows the location of the plan change area relative to the Patamahoe settlement. So as John mentioned, 35 or so hectares of land, currently mostly in rural production zone, with a small amount already zoned single house, and surrounded by rural production and the railway corridor to the south. Next slide, please. Thanks. So this is the proposed zoning. So as you can see, the majority of land is proposed to be single house. A small area towards the railway corridor, roughly 2.5 hectares, I think, is proposed to be light industry, and the eastern area is proposed to be future urban zone, and it's in recognition of existing productive activities that are occurring on that site, all those sites at the moment. Thank you. I guess John touched on one of the key issues is around productive land and productive soils. These are just a couple of slides to illustrate both the applicants and the council's independent assessments of how capable these soils are. So John referenced elite and prime soils. Elite is anything that's called LUC 1. Prime is anything that's LUC 2 and 3. So if you look in the bottom left at the legend, you'll see a bunch of numbers. So anything with a 2 in front of it or a 3 in front of it is prime soils, according to the applicant's assessment. So that covers about 97% of the plan change area. And if we just go to the next slide, this is the analysis undertaken by council specialists. And as you can see, a large amount of the area is covered by 1W1, so that's classified as elite soil. And the breakdown there is 58% elite soil, according to our analysis, and 40% prime soils. So there is a debate over whether the land contains elite soils. There's also other complicating factors worth just noting, such as fragmented landholding. So the sites have been somewhat subdivided. There are dwellings there. The land is proximate to existing residential areas, so there's potential for reverse sensitivity effects if productive uses were undertaken. And I guess these are factors that require, or at least invite, a finer merits assessment rather than saying that this should be stopped at the clause 25 stage. So I think that's all the slides I have, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sanjay. Can we just summarise the soils issue? So the council specialist identified, I think the coverage is elite and prime soils are 98.6%, correct? Sanjay, are you still with us?
Hi, yes. I'm referring to what I had in table 1 of the report.
I think it's in the
I had
report,
97%, perhaps the figures might be slightly out.
Okay, it's late 90s either way. And the applicant identified how much in total in prime and elite in percentages?
So the applicant identified 97% of the land as being prime soils. So that's either class 2 or class 3. They identified no land as being elite soils.
Okay. Okay, there's a... Okay, can we go to a map that shows Patumahoe. Can we zoom out? I think it's upper slide. I think it's 2 slides up. The existing unitary plan zoning. We'll find that one. There is some land that is existing, the core of Patumahoe. Under the unitary plan, how many more dwelling numbers estimated are provided for, not currently there, are provided for under the zoning provided through the 2016 Auckland Unitary Plan?
Yeah, sure. So the numbers that we've obtained from REMU indicate that there are about 212 dwellings enabled but not yet constructed, and that includes the Patumahoe Hill sub-precinct, which is that land to the southwest, or rather to the west of this plan change area. So yeah, 212 is the figure that we have.
So can you just give us a split between, so we're looking at the parcel of land that stretches northwest to southeast, but it's on the southwest side there on the top of the boundary is Day Road. So that parcel of land there, that was signalled through the Auckland Unitary Plan and the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy as development ready land. That's live zoned, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Right. How many dwellings are on that land today?
I'm not sure how many dwellings are there today. The numbers that we had indicated that had capacity for 109 dwellings.
So are there 3 dwellings there today, or 5, or has it started to be developed? Is there a master plan for it? Have we seen development of that land?
I understand that there's earthworks, preparatory works being undertaken. I'm not sure the status of that, sorry.
So surely there's some kind of resource consenting process for that. Have we not checked on that?
Councillor Darby, I can maybe help there.
Thank you, Jacques Victor.
Yeah, that's correct. It's between 100 and 110 dwellings. They received a subdivision consent for 73 lots in 2018. Work is underway, but there are no buildings yet. And there's no 223 certificate yet, so the subdivision isn't completed yet. But a subdivision of 73 lots in 2018.
Okay, so capacity of 109, 73 lot consent, but not being progressed at this time. Okay, and if we go up to the core precinct of Patumahoe, above that road that runs northwest to south east, going down to John Street. How much infill is provided by the Auckland Unitary Plan in that area? So we know that the 109, is it the balance? Is it of around about 103 can go into there?
That's correct, yeah, 103.
Okay, is there any structure plan? The Auckland Unitary Plan requires a structure plan to proceed going to live zoning. Is there any structure plan over the private plan change area?
So the applicant has undertaken an assessment against Appendix 1, which is the structure plan guidelines in the unitary plan. So that's essentially, that thinking has gone into that.
Yeah, my question is, I'm looking at the Auckland Unitary Plan. There is a very clear requirement in that document. It's a statutory document requiring a structure plan before proceeding to consideration of rezoning. So has that process been followed? I gather not.
Councillor Darby, that's in relation to rezoning from future urban to urban. not in relation to expansion of a rural settlement. I could be mistaken, but if you can give us the reference in the unitary plan, we can check that. But from memory, that's there are similar assessment matters when considering expanding a rural settlement, and that's what Sanji has mentioned, that the applicant has gone through the policy exercise of doing the analysis, but they haven't prepared a structure plan per se, which from memory is the requirement for future urban land going to urban as opposed to rural land going to urban.
Yeah, you're correct. The wording is a structure plan precedes future urban land zoned and ready for development. Okay, look, I think I'll open up questions to others here. But look, before I do so, can I just go to the infrastructure requirements? Can I just check water care? Well, if we run down paragraphs 66, 67, 68 on infrastructure, if we go to infrastructure first, it's not clear what water care actually said about wastewater. Is there wastewater capacity for 212 units that are provided for under the Auckland Unitary Plan, the existing development, plus this, please?
Yes, so the applicant has provided details of correspondence with water care prior to lodgement, and they have indicated that there is capacity to service.
Okay. And do you confirm that with water care, or when you're considering this private plan change? Do you confirm what you might have received from the applicant with, say, water care, Auckland Transport, Healthy Waters, any other parts of council that they might have heard from? Do you check that is the case?
Yep. So this was it was run past. Sorry, just a second. This was run past water care for comment, and they indicated that the discussion provided by the applicant is consistent with what they understand the case to be.
In Auckland Transport?
I'm not sure if we have comment from Auckland Transport. They were involved in terms of identifying potential further information required. That was through our transport specialist. They have a tendency to be reluctant to get too involved at the pre-notification stage, given that they are often a submitter on private plan changes.
Okay, I think I've got further questions here, but I think I'll go to other members. Councillor Walker, would you pose your question, please?
Sure. So I note, as far as soils are concerned, that it's not just soils, it's also access to water and obviously climate. Has there been sufficient consideration given to another factor, which is access to markets, because this area is very close? The other issue that I want to raise, as it goes to what the applicants have put up in our consideration, is around the cumulative effect of loss of land for food production against a background where Auckland's population is tracking to go up significantly over time, and for that matter, that of New Zealand. So do we take into account the finite nature of elite and prime land, the cumulative effects in terms of the reduction in that land over time, and the potential of that land for catering for additional production? And that might be against a background where, in order to meet our climate change obligations, we may have to switch to a diet that involves significantly less meat and involves significantly more consumption of vegetables and products that might be grown on this kind of land. And that goes to climate change. And the other aspect around that is the capacity of these soils to retain carbon and for that to be enhanced. So are those considerations that we can take into account?
I'll check with the staff on that, Councillor Walker. John Duguid.
Through the chair, John Duguid here. Absolutely, those are matters that must be taken into account in preparing a council submission and by the hearings panel and making a decision. But some of those matters are actually involve quite a bit of technical analysis, quite a bit of policy thought and analysis. It's work that we do, but is getting beyond what the courts have directed should happen at this stage in the process, where we're making a procedural decision to accept, adopt or reject. We've flagged in the report that these are issues and that the best way to deal with them is to make a strong submission on them and come in with evidence as to whether we think this plan change ultimately stacks up or not. But issues of food production, Auckland's food needs, the specifics of that, we've even had some recent High Court decisions on the unitary plan that give some direction as to how the plan should be interpreted in the detailed policy analysis. So in short, it's very important matters to look at. We totally agree as officers, but our advice is to deal with that through a submission and address it through evidence at the hearings.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I guess my concern is if we haven't done our homework around the areas that I'm suggesting in advance, and that might be taking into account that we could have any number of applications like this, we actually aren't in a position to perhaps advise an applicant in advance, and for that matter be sufficiently informed to consider things when the plan change is considered.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. I'll take the last part as comment, and I appreciate your first question, which is, I think, at the core of one of the challenges here, the productive soils that you're referring to. Thank you. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions for me. So one of them, in the report here under the climate impact statement, I'm really not getting that. Could you clarify that a bit and explain that a bit?
Sanjay, is that with you?
Yep, I can clarify that. So, again, I guess it comes down to whether it's a course merits or a finer merits assessment. Should it be a reason to stop the plan change now, or should it be something that should be discussed through hearings? And probably not mentioned there, but as mentioned throughout the document, is that there is that opportunity for a council submission to ensure that climate impacts can be considered in the subsequent stages of the plan change.
Thank you. I've got a second question, because just in relation to that answer, I'm a bit confused about when is the climate impact bad enough to consider it in this assessment that we're doing right now? And I would suggest that there's some really scary climate outcomes and a number of questions have been asked around this point. So my question is, our test in the report is sound resource management practice, and you've given advice in the report that it's a high bar and this doesn't meet the test for rejection. Do you have an example on what would be rejected under that test? Because to me, I can't think of one harder. But what are your thoughts?
Through the chair, I'll pick that up. Well, perhaps just to clarify, is this in relation to climate change specifically, or just sound resource management practice in general?
No, well, just so we've talked about climate, but we've also talked about transport and soils and 100 other problems, right? If this doesn't meet the test, what does meet the test? That's my question. What more are you looking for?
We've given previously examples of heavy industrial activity in a residential area, significant urbanisation in a severe flood plain area, or in an area of significant coastal hazards from inundation or erosion. Things where there are obvious immediate hazards or significant adverse environmental effects on adjacent uses. There isn't a lot of guidance from the court. The court's other guidance, in addition to saying it should be a course level assessment, is that if there is any doubt as to whether it's contrary to sound resource management practice or not, then it's best to accept the plan change and have the issues discussed and considered on the basis of expert evidence by a panel. So it's not a huge amount of case law, but perhaps those examples there are ones that would obviously spring to mind as being contrary to sound resource management practice.
Yes, that's an interesting discussion. Thanks for the answer, and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson, and Councillor Coombe, please.
Thank you. I had a similar question to Councillor Henderson about the climate impact statement. And again, this picks up on what we're actually trying to say in terms of climate impact. A clause, the sentence there that says this process is unrelated to any greenhouse gas emissions, but isn't this process kicking off potentially new development that is going to have an impact? So I'm trying to think of the right word. It's not disingenuous. I'm not trying to say it's dishonest, but it's kind of limiting it in a way that is only telling part of the story in terms of what this decision is. I'll go with maybe simplistic, because I mean, if we limit down our statement to just say, well, this decision today doesn't have any impact when it triggers a whole lot of potential development. So that was my first question. And so maybe if I could have a second question as well,
yes.
Which is really, I just wanted to be talked through the use of the double negative in paragraph 63 in the recommendation, and why we don't just say this is consistent with sound resource management practice, which is in paragraph 74. It just seems, I mean, maybe that's how the legislation is framed, but it does seem a very weird use of a double negative, or an unnecessary use of a double negative.
Okay, now, John, can you reflect and reply to that question, please?
Through the chair, just picking up on the second question, yes, it is the drafting of the legislation talks about it not being in accordance with some resource management practice, and hence you end up with the double negative. So it is the legislation drafting and us just responding to that. The first question was, I guess the implication there was that, well, the indication there was that in accepting a private plan change, we are endorsing it as council. That is not the case. It is saying that it hasn't failed the tests, or it hasn't hit one of the tests for being rejected at this point, but the merit of it is still all up for grabs. So it's really shouldn't be taken that this is saying that everything is fine. It's just a matter of sort of fine tuning. It could still fundamentally have some major issues that mean that it doesn't pass the test when it gets to a hearing on evidence.
Thank you, John. Further question, Councillor Coombe?
Well, I think that's still an outstanding question around the climate impact statement, but we heard before on the other item that that's work in progress, because I just don't think we should be accepting this simplistic level of detail in a statement. But what I'm hearing is that in terms of the test, we are looking to ensure that it is consistent with sound resource management practice, is what we're looking at, and that's quite a limited test, but that really only gets considered at the next stage in more detail. Is that right? Yeah. Thank you.
Just want to check on that. I don't think it's necessarily only that question is posed at the next stage. It's posed at this stage as well. John, whether it's not in accordance with sound resource management practice is addressed at this stage, absolutely, isn't it? In section 20.
That's absolutely correct. So one of the grounds that council can refuse a private plan change is where it is not in accordance with sound resource management practice. So if the committee was of the view that this plan change is not in accordance with sound resource management practice, then that is one of the grounds on which you as the decision makers could reject this private plan change.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Cashmore, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a little bit confused before. You were talking about the capacities for the piped water and wastewater. With this particular proposal development, with the existing little township and with the other residentially zoned land, which was zoned by FTC towards the end of its term, is there sufficient capacity in the piped network to enable the continuation of all those three?
So for you, Sanjay?
Hi, yep, Sanjay here. So I guess the correspondence that we've received between the applicant and Watercare, or at least the letter from Watercare to the applicant, is quite clear in that it says the increased wastewater flows from this development are expected to have no more than a negligible effect on the existing network. So that's for wastewater.
Cool, thanks. And the potable water, I imagine, has got sufficient capacity because of the new pipeline that went through.
That's slightly different. There's a bit of a flag there from Watercare that the developer will need to contribute to additional water storage. And I mean, that could be undertaken through future resource consent applications for subdivision of the land.
Okay, thanks. My second question, if I may, Mr. Mayor, is to, I guess, would be John Dogood, and that is... Sorry?
Chair, he meant chair. Good, carry on.
Oh, yeah, well, maybe in the future. So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So my concern is the act passed by the government around protection of productive growing soils, and where that comes into play. Obviously, it's probably not at this stage because it's a more fine attribute, but does it come into play at the hearings process? And would that have an effect on negating this development completely?
Through the chair, Deputy Mayor, you're referring to the national draft national policy statement, or proposed national policy statement on highly productive land, which came out earlier in the year, and Council made a submission on that document. It was a proposal. It hasn't been finalised by the government. Latest indications from the Ministry for the Environment are that that would be considered by the government if we have the same government in the new year. So it has no legal standing at this point in time. That the proposed national policy statement on highly productive land would pose difficulties for this private plan change, and if it is issued by the government in the new year before this plan change gets to a hearing, it would certainly be something that the hearings panel, council and the applicant would have to take into account. So in short, it comes down to the timing of when that national policy statement comes into effect. It hasn't come into effect yet, depends on the final form of it. But if it comes into effect before a hearing takes place, it would be a key matter for the decision makers to, the hearings panel to consider.
So we don't have to give effect to that legislation until it is passed. There's not a precautionary effect like we have with some of our own stuff we have to do.
That's correct. There's no, it has no legal standing, and in actual fact, if we had regard to it, I suspect we would be, there could be grounds for a challenge to that.
Thanks. My last one, John, is you'd recommend here that we accept this private plan change to go forward to commissioners because there are not grounds for it to be rejected at this point in time. That's because if we did reject it, we'd probably face a judicial review.
The process, if a council rejects a private plan change, the applicant can then appeal direct to the Environment Court. So they don't need to go High Court on a point of law or a procedural matter. They can go straight to the Environment Court and argue the case around whether this is not in accordance with sound resource management and the other matters that council will be rejecting it on if that took place. So it would be an Environment Court appeal on the provisions under clause 25 that relate to accept, adopt, reject, as opposed to the normal Environment Court appeal process, which is on the sort of detailed merit assessment after a hearing.
Thanks, John.
And just following that point that the Deputy Mayor's made about the proposed NPS that the government are working on, clearly it's not with us, but we do have the Regional Policy Statement Objective B2.6.1. It's referred under paragraph 17, and I read it out. Avoids elite soils and avoids, where practical, prime soils which are significant for their ability to sustain food production. And then there's paragraph 79 from a recent High Court decision. So, John, can you reflect on that? Is it at this stage? Is it sound resource management practice, knowing that 98%, either 97 or 98.6% of the soils we're dealing with are either elite or prime, and with that regional policy statement there, are you suggesting that progressing and accepting this for notification is sound resource management approach?
So the sound resource management is separate to whether the plan change is consistent with the regional policy statement chapter of the unitary plan. The consistency with the regional policy statement chapter of the unitary plan ties in best to the clause 25 accept, adopt, reject provisions around rejecting where something is would make the plan inconsistent with part 5 of the RMA. So the two slightly separate issues there, but there is a bit of overlap. But I'll address both of them. So in terms of sound resource management practice, we have significant areas of prime soils within the future and in Auckland. There is already an approach in Auckland of, and has been through the unitary plan and through the Auckland plan, of allowing for Auckland to expand onto prime soils and in a smaller number of cases elite soils, in balancing the need for Auckland to grow and then the need for different parts of Auckland to grow, and balancing that with the food production needs for Auckland. So on balance at this stage, we're saying that it's not immediately not in accordance with sound resource management practice. It's an approach that Auckland Council has taken, and it needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis as to whether that's the right area to enable that and for what particular reasons. So that's the sound resource management practice. In terms of the policy issues and how the unitary plan frames up prime versus elite soils, there is a degree of complexity there that needs to be worked through, in my view, through evidence, and at the hearing, the High Court decision you referred to was quite clear that it's not simply a matter of the soils are either elite or prime and then therefore should be avoided. You then have to look at the issue of how necessary they are for Auckland's food production needs, and that's a fairly recent High Court decision that I guess we're still working through exactly what that means, and this will be another test case for what it means to link the existence of prime and elite soils with Auckland's future food and existing food production needs. So it's, to my mind, that's getting into a more than a course merits assessment of the policy. It's getting into a detailed policy discussion and analysis that we feel is more appropriate at a hearing.
Thank you, John. Councillor Hills, you have a question?
No, I guess my massive concern is everything about this. So I guess all the questions have been answered. I just wish we could reject it. But if the advice is that it would be more successful through a hearing, then at this stage, then I guess that's the advice. You know, yeah. I don't know. I just don't understand why.
Councillor, I needed to ask you for a question because we're just not taking comments at this time. It's not moved or seconded, and I need to just hold on that. Can I just put you in the speaking list, please, Councillor? And I'll come
I don't
back
need to. Thank you.
Thank you. Just coming back, probably for Jacques Victor. Jacques, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Thank you, Jacques. Now, look, I've looked at the Auckland Unitary Plan. I've looked at the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy. I've read the report, of course. The Future Urban Land Supply Strategy does identify growth in Patomahoe. It doesn't identify growth in this area. It identifies growth within the old part of Patomahoe, 103 dwelling units growth there, we've been told, and then 109 just south of Days Road, I think it is. The most recent expansion, which was identified under the false Future Urban Land Supply Strategy, was in that southwest area. I think you're conversant with that. To your knowledge, there is no other future urban land supply urbanisation signalled in any of our statutory documents beyond the core Patomahoe and the southwest. Am I correct?
Yes, that's correct. So what the development, this all comes from the development strategy. What that identifies is the future growth, which was from 2017 onwards, and that was the live zoned land that came through the unitary plan. The development strategy did not foresee any additional growth in this town over the next 30 years. It was purely the live zoned land through the unitary plan. Nothing else.
So going back, just going back to that process at that time, you know, leading up to 2016, would it be right that various staff would have examined, you know, how to possibly grow Patomahoe within and beyond, and that would have been very carefully examined?
Yes, that's correct, as was with all of the other rural towns and villages. So where there was a reasonable argument for a village that could grow, at times some additional land was added. Like I say, additional land, so the 10 hectares was added in this case, and that was the live zoned land through the unitary plan, but nothing in addition to that. One of the reasons why it gets really hard in expanding some of these villages is because of infrastructure. So in a sense, it comes back to the same discussion as what was had on the Drury plan changes. There are consequential infrastructure issues. So in this case, according to Watercare, the wastewater is fine, but there is no doubt there will be transport implications if you add that kind of level of development. And so that is often why it becomes really difficult in these small villages to expand, simply because of the cost associated on the networks, not just within the village itself, but it has implications on the networks. But yes, you're correct. The development strategy did not foresee any further growth in this location.
Thank you, Jacques. And just going back to you, Sanjay, when I go to paragraph 64, you're providing the committee members with a little bit of information about transport. And Mr. Edwards, your consultant, has said that there's no problems with the immediate road network, but this is not a community that sits in isolation and doesn't travel. Can you tell me how people move in and out of this community? My understanding is that we've already got a road network and even now a rail network that's becoming stressed in that Drury corridor. So most of the jobs are predominantly, you need to travel through the Drury corridor into Manukau for most employment. Can you tell us really what the wider context is of transport, please, not just the immediate?
So sorry, just to clarify, you'd like a breakdown of the effects on the wider network, and not just the immediate network. Is that correct?
Well, the paragraph assumes that people only travel the local road network, and we know that that very rarely happens. Look, the committee members, for one, certainly need to understand the implications of movement beyond the local road network into what I understand is a heavily congested Pukekohe Expressway, I think it's called, leading to State Highway 1 and the State Highway 1 going north as well, but particularly that Pukekohe connection to State Highway 1.
Sure. Well, absolutely. So the applicant has done quite a wide trip generation analysis, wider than we would typically expect from a private plan change applicant. They've modelled the expected trips on the 2028 and 2046 traffic models that incorporate the growth in the south and supporting growth alliances preferred network, and they found that it would, in the context of the traffic anticipated from the growth areas in the south, it would only be a minor increase. And now, of course, you could view that through the lens of that's actually going to be a cumulative increase on the vehicle trips generated by growth in the south, and that will be a really important thing that we look at in the next phase if this does get accepted.
Okay, thank you. Look, members, I think we've put some good questions here. Members, as your chair, I am expressing some concern about progressing this, that is accepting it. I have got another motion, but how I'd like to go about this is show you that motion. I'd like you to read it. And then I'm going to go back and invite somebody to move the staff recommendation. And we test the staff recommendation. If it should fail, and I won't be supporting the staff recommendation, if it should fail, then we might go to my motion. But I want to show you that motion first. So if I can just see that on the screen, please. If you could just read that through, please. So the key arguments are around soils. We've covered that. These are elite and prime soils. And you've got paragraph 77 there. And you've heard from Jacques Victor about the planned growth, anticipated growth for this area. Okay, so that is the possible alternative motion. And once members have read that and understood that, I'll go back to the staff recommendation. Question from Councillor Simpson.
Once upon a time, I rejected a private plan change, and that didn't end well. So I need advice why this rejection is a good idea.
Well, if I can just say at the outset too, as your chair, no reasons were given at that time when the rejection. So I know the plan change you're referring to, there were actually no reasons given in the debate at all or through the motion. I'm suggesting that there is good reason, but it is a fair question, but that is my reply to you, but you are deserving of a reply from the Chief of Strategy.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, as in the previous situation that Councillor Simpson was raising, as staff, we are recommending that it should be accepted through the RMA, and those trigger levels are those things we have to consider. We're not making a determination or a suggestion about the merits or the ultimate whether it gets agreed or declined. We're just talking about starting the process. This alternative resolution as in the previous case, you can make a decision to reject it. There are some reasons on the screen for your consideration. They're not the staff's recommendation, they're the chair's recommendation. And it really does come down to, as I think you've heard about this issue of whether it's consistent or with sound resource management practice. So, in summary, my answer is you can make a reject decision. That is not the staff's recommendation to you today, but it is there for you to consider. And just to the chair, just to avoid the issue that we got into last time, it would be great if you wanted to consider the reject recommendation first, and then, as necessary, go to the accept one. It's just the way we do it. Yeah, but that's perhaps a next step. You need to discuss whether you want to go for it first.
Point of order. Does the standing orders guide which one we put first?
I was just having a conversation with Sandra about that. Sorry. So.
I think the answer is no, but it's a recommendation from yourselves, senior management.
It is because in the past our experience has been where an accept was not agreed, there was an issue about actually rejecting it as well. So I guess from my perspective, if we were clear about rejecting it, if it's a no, then the obvious answer is the staff's recommendation. The other way, it can get a little bit tricky.
Okay, Mayor Goff, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, my question is this. I seem to recall from the last incident that we had over the plan change in Orake that if this matter were to go to court, we would have to disclose, or the appellant would disclose or ask for disclosure of the fact of staff advice to us. So if it goes before a court, the first thing that will come up is that councillors were recommended by professional staff that it be accepted, not rejected, and that puts us on the back foot immediately. I'm not personally in favour of the plan change, I think, because of the elite and prime soils, but it's a question really, do we oppose that in rejecting now, which is likely to be judicially reviewed, and we are, from staff advice, we're likely to lose it, or do we simply make strong submissions against it on the grounds that we think are sufficient to stop the development going ahead? And I favour the latter.
Okay, thank you. Well, look, oh, sorry, I need to go back to Councillor Simpson.
Yes, I had another question, and that is it to staff that should we reject, do you think that will cause us to pay costs legally to fight this? I mean, I'm with the Mayor, actually. I think everyone doesn't like the extensive high product soils for urban development. I think we all share that. But I'm trying to, in a fiscally tight environment, still do the right thing. And my question is, are we likely to go to court because we reject? Or in your professional opinion, are we better to accept and then submit strongly, noting our concerns? Because I'm just worried about the financial impact on top of everything else.
So look, in my professional view, if you did reject, it would go to court. I can't be, as in the other situation, I can't be absolutely certain around costs. But if the court did find that that was not a robust legal decision, then there may well be costs. So let's assume there will be. I think that's probably the worst case scenario. The other option, as we are suggesting to you, is accept, notwithstanding, some of the real concerns that we've talked you through today, to do a submission as well, and to then let the hearing panel decide everything together in the round with other submitters and other views going on at the same time.
I also have a question from Councillor Filipaina, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to the staff, can I confirm that the agenda item hasn't been moved or seconded?
That's why we're taking questions right now. Yes, that's correct.
So as a result, the recommendations on the agenda paper, there's no substantive recommendations as yet because it hasn't been moved and seconded.
Well,
if that's the case, Chair,
I'll move the reject the
you
private
either
plan change.
have to, this is, and I'm getting seeking guidance from Sandra and Duncan, that you have to end up putting what is the substantive recommendation for us to vote. Can I get that confirmation, Chair, that it needs to be a recommendation that we will vote on, and at the moment there's none?
Okay, just to clarify then, I've just taken members through and I wanted to socialise it before just putting it before you. So I will seek a second. I'll move the alternative motion under the A, Roman 1 through to 5, and call for a second. Is there a second for the motion before us? I have a second from Councillor Henderson. So I'm happy to take, I think your question is satisfied, Councillor Filipaina. I have a question from...
Yes, it is. So now what we have is your recommendation to reject the plan change. That is the substantive?
Correct, Councillor Filipaina.
Okay, so I'm just going to wait for comments because, I'll wait with comments speaking about the substantive because, I'm just going to wait because I disagree with it.
Thank you. Councillor Bartley.
Can I just remind or let the committee know that the lawyer for this plan change is listening in, and so if there is any potential court action, this is all going to be used as evidence.
No, I'm sorry. This is a meeting of the Auckland Council Planning Committee. I don't have the opportunity to give you any insight. No, I'm sorry. Can you please refrain? Thank you. Councillor Bartley, all of this agenda in the open is open. You know, we always need to be careful of what we say. But thank you for that reminder. But I'm fully aware that at any time, anything we say in the open session of our meetings could appear somewhere else. Councillor Mulholland.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to call for a division on that. Thanks.
You want to? Sorry, I didn't hear.
Division on the vote for the substantive.
Do I have any? Look, I'll just outline what I've put here, members. Members, if it was just a matter of rubber stamping what our officials bring, then we would not be here as leaders. We're dealing with 98% elite and prime soils. We know that we've gone through a process and identified the growth of Paramahoe with 103 dwelling units potential within and 109 on the southwest edge, which has not yet been taken up. There is growth provided through really robust planning. And through that process in 12 to 16 and the appeals, this further growth was not anticipated. There is growth already. This growth encroaches onto prime, productive food basket soils that likely feed this city and feed other New Zealanders around the country. And paving over those soils is a high risk. I think we need to show the leadership at this stage. And while I really value the contributions of our officials, I am questioning their advice. We question their advice often. It's not for us to necessarily agree with that advice. It's our job to listen, go into a deep inquiry and land our political decision and show leadership in this city. The reasons are outlined, and they are about soils, and they are about the robust planning that we undertook, that identified growth that is yet to be taken up. That is the growth for Paramahoe and not further growth. And I do think it does not satisfy that test of sound resource management going forward. I don't want to dwell on this further. I think I have canvassed these issues pretty well, but I'm going to leave this now in our hands collectively and listen to your views. And yep, we can take a division, and I'll call for comment from Councillor Dalton next.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Look, I'm not going to support this. I would have supported the officer's recommendations. I think it should be able to go through the process. We should submit on it. I hear what you and everyone is saying about the fertile soils, and, you know, it can arguably break your heart when you drive down Pukekohe, Pitimahoe nowadays and see the infrastructure, because life is changing. Life is changing, and we're providing houses, homes and businesses. I just support it going through the process as it should, and that we put in our own submission on that, of which we all need to participate in. So I'd like to ensure that we get a fair go at that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dalton. Councillor Filipina, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I, like Councillor Dalton, will not be supporting this. I take on board the information passed on by our staff than yourself, Chair. And so Councillor Dalton was right. It is a process. We need to, one, let it go through to the process. Also, we need to submit into that process. I don't want to see the reputation of Auckland Council go through with any judicial review, which I think will happen. So look, I totally support the information we received prior to this recommendation being the substantive recommendation. So I will be voting against yours and Councillor Henderson's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Filipina. And Councillor Walker?
Sure. I'm supportive of making the choice that Councillor Darby suggests. The context here is this is a private plan change, and this plan change has come about because it doesn't meet the requirements of the unitary plan. It's actually outside it. And I think that we've had plenty of discussion around the issues that go to sound resource management and other issues that give us good grounds to actually not go down this private plan change path. And I guess the bigger question I'd ask, and I guess it goes to the issue that Councillor Henderson raised, is when do we actually reject something if we're not comfortable with it and test it? And I would suggest that this is one of those occasions. If we're frightened about judicial review, we should keep in mind that judicial review is about our decision-making process, not about whether or not this particular area of land goes to the further test in a hearing. And I'm quite satisfied that we've had a robust debate, that we've had a really good coverage of grounds that substantiate turning down this private plan change. I'm quite comfortable with that. And I also think that we would find evidence to support us in terms of substantiating our decision. So I'm quite happy to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Can I call Councillor Coombe, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am going to speak in support and make some comments that I was going to make when I was going to speak against the recommendations for this, taking this forward. And I've got a few points I'd like to make. One is just that it does feel like this process the wheels of it have all got underway as if COVID hasn't happened, as if the climate emergency hasn't happened, and we're dealing with quite a different world. And I just think that this is an example of somewhere where we really need to be resetting and rethinking about what we're trying to progress, and especially where we have this request is inconsistent with our strategies and our plans, which, you know, we've gone through robust processes around those plans and strategies, and so we should be backing them up. Another reason that I am supporting this is I do think the climate impact statement is really inadequate, and that should have been a point to just say, hang on a minute, there's more consideration that we need to make. And that was one of the reasons I was going to reject the officer recommendations, because we do just have to be thinking differently about how we are progressing developments, and especially where this is an area that is not earmarked for development. We're hearing that it is elite or prime soils, which goes to another of my points that I wanted to make, was around the fact that it seems to me to be quite an opportunistic request, and there is more work that we need to do around value uplift, and we know that that is a work stream that we need to be progressing, that needs to be looked at, so that we don't just open the floodgates for far more applications to rezone land, which was never considered to be part of the future urban land supply. So those were the four main reasons why I just feel that I'm happy to support this rejection of this. And I do appreciate what's been said around we should just let the process as if we're not in control of this process. But I do think we actually have, this is where we are the decision makers, and we do have the opportunity now to have a rethink around if this is a request that we wish to see progress. At this point, our hands are not tied, and we can take a strong position at this point. So that's just some comments that I wanted to make. Thank you. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Kerman. Councillor Henderson, please.
Thanks, Chair. The questions and debate have been extremely helpful, and I just want to acknowledge the Chair and staff on that point. And I agree with Councillor Coombe that with respect, the climate impact statement needed far more, although questioning has drawn out some good information on that point. When you break it all down, this council is required to interpret statutory tests before a hearings panel or environment court takes a look. And this really is about where do you draw the line on what sound resource management practice actually means. And we do have limited case law to guide us on this point. So we have to look to legislation, we have to look to case law that we have to look at planning, we have to look at staff advice, and most importantly, I think, we need to look at the ordinary meaning of the term, because that also comes into play. There are signals through Parliament on protection of highly productive soils, although I acknowledge that that hasn't passed yet. There are also signals as well through that cited High Court case from the Chair, and various planning documentation that has also been cited during this debate. So is that clear enough to guide us? Well, it could be a hell of a lot better, I'll acknowledge that. But the evidence in front of me suggests that this would not require much extension of existing precedent on this point to say that this is not, in fact, sound resource management practice. And I suppose just to conclude, and you make a fantastic point, Chair, ultimately I've been called upon as a councillor to make this decision. We're not a rubber stamping body. We do have to look at these things. And I have to vote my conscience. At the end of the day, I have to go home and I have to explain how I voted on these things. And I can't say how I voted to accept this. So in a world of climate change, in a world of food insecurity, in a world of huge transport challenges, I just cannot accept this. And that is why I've seconded the motion and happy to do so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. And Councillor Cooper, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just acknowledge I had to go out on council business during the actual the question time. So I will limit my comments to where I'm coming from a process point of view. First, I acknowledge the huge amount of work you have done, and you always do your homework. And I acknowledge, in terms of this, you know, all of those points that you say are valid. I don't want this development to go ahead personally. As a councillor, I don't. However, I don't get to decide that. And because of my feeling about that I actually don't want us using our elite soils, it's in the middle of nowhere. We've got issues where, you know, I've got development 20 kilometres straight up the motorway here that is not getting developed properly, is growing housing, jobs, the whole thing still can't get the infrastructure funding. So I have a bit of a bias. So for me, I need to let the process run. So for me, I'm a process person. I'm the chair of the regulatory committee. I believe in letting a process run. I do worry about having to defend this, and it will go to court. We've probably got a good case, but at the end of the day, if we lose that, it goes to the process anyway. So I unfortunately can't support this, Mr. Chair, but what I do support is a very, very robust submission, possibly objecting to this by, you know, our staff in terms of, but I mean, I'm not going to second guess that either, because they need to use evidence. It can't be opinion, it has to be evidence. But picking up a lot of the concerns for the people that do support this, and you support this, Mr. Chair. So I absolutely support a very strong submission going to this plan change. So I will vote against this, Mr. Chair, but it's no disrespect to your views and the work you've done on this. I just believe in the process and the fact that we have some very experienced commissioners who will hopefully take a lot of this precedent into account and the issues that our council will put forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Mayor Goff, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I'm totally against the use of elite and prime soils for housing purposes. The National Policy Statement does give an indication of where the public and the government is going on that, and I have no doubt that most Aucklanders, if you ask them, would say it's not appropriate to use our best soils to build houses on. So that's not an issue in contention in our discussion today. The issue in contention today is how we best stop the plan. And I'm against the recommendations because I do not believe this is the best way to stop the development of the land. I think if we follow the practice of opposing something when the best professional advice that we have, legal and planning, is that the acceptance is required by the statute under which we are operating, we are foolishly throwing money away and entering into a legal process that we are likely not to succeed. I note that our Chief of Strategy has said quite clearly that she doesn't believe that we would win this case, and therefore the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars we invest in it will be wasted money. The place in which we oppose this, as we've debated before in this committee, is when it goes to the independent hearing commissioners. If it meets the statutory requirements to be accepted, then we need to accept it. That's the advice. That does not stop us putting in the strongest submission of which we are capable to oppose the acceptance of the plan change. And that's the process we should be following. It's not about rubber stamping our public officials' advice. We are not people who rubber stamp, but we're bloody foolish if we don't listen to very good and well thought out professional advice. And, you know, the hearing commissioners themselves and ultimately the Environment Court would look at what our professional advisors have said, and they would take that into account. So I refuse to accept the statement that we are rubber stamping advice. We have listened to advice, and the advice is, yes, there are good grounds to oppose this, but the place to oppose it is before the hearing commissioners, not in not accepting it. And I think we're foolish if we don't follow that professional advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. And Deputy Mayor Cashmore, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just look at the recommendations. It says accept the private plan change request in point 1, having regard to relevant case law that the request does not meet the limited grounds for rejection. That's sound policy. That's sound policy. The RMA and the whole expansion growth thing is based upon balance, fairness and equity. There's a program called Making Good Decisions that RMA commissioners have to pass to become a commissioner. Making Good Decisions. I know Richard Hills did it last term. And it ensures that you actually have the ability to have a balanced approach and listen to the relevant evidence to make that good decision. I don't have that qualification. And I don't think many councillors other than Mr. Councillor Hills do. Chris does. So good on you, Chris. However, I think before you actually go do that, you need to be able to illustrate that you can proceed there. We have a process in place to create that balance. And do we want to build on elite soils? There is in a surveyor's office in Pukekohe a picture on the wall, 1902, I think it is from memory, or 3, of the main street of Pukekohe. And there's about 15 houses there, and there's obviously a shingle or a dirt street. And for all the people who live in Pukekohe, and God bless their little souls, who say, stop building on elite soils, your house is on an elite soil. That township has expanded since 2002, and it probably will continue to expand one way or another, because that is the balance effect that we have to have. I would like qualified hearings commissioners to hear the evidence, to come up with a decision that weighs up the balance. I do not see that it is our role here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And Councillor Hills, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I am really wrestling with this one, mainly because of the advice I said earlier. It's a shame we couldn't find a way to reject this because it seems so incredibly wrong. I mean, this is nothing like the Orake one. That was moving a development 15 metres, 15 metres. This is 34 hectares of land that was never planned to be built on for 30 years. This is not an out of sequence development. This is a ridiculous development. But on the other hand, it's really difficult for me to support a rejection if our staff are saying that the threshold is too high. And I think that threshold is ridiculous if we can't see that that this is the issue. But I do worry if we go for a reject, we get it reviewed and we lose that, then it is much harder for us to then refuse it or put, much harder to decline a plan change through the process that it will inevitably get anyway. So I'm sort of grappling with abstaining because I'm so opposed to this direction, and I definitely support yourself and Councillor Henderson and all the words that Councillor Henderson said. But on the other hand, I don't understand how we argue the rejection through a judicial review, because the people who are arguing it have just told us we can't do that. So this is very, this is very, very difficult. I don't really understand how we can do what we're about, what we want to do here. And I should have asked my question because I kind of assumed what the staff had said was that we couldn't do it. But it is nothing like Orake. That was, literally moving a building 15 metres in an already built up urban area. This is 34 hectares on prime and elite soil. So I'm grappling with an abstention based on the fact that I'm totally torn between the process we're being told and the ridiculous situation that we're being put through, and and the fact that this could create a continuous stream of these coming in, and at what point do we actually get the right to reject something that it seems so inappropriate?
Thank you, Councillor Hills. I've got two more speakers. Councillor Simpson first, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I don't think there's anyone probably in the room that disagrees with the intent of what you want to do here. I think the question more is how we achieve the same goal, you know. I want to put it straight on the table. I actually do not support building on our elite soils. I absolutely don't. So I absolutely 100% support your intent here. But I'm also conscious that you know, as chair of the Finance Committee, I can't buy a financial fight if I don't need to. So what I'm after, which will cost us money. So what I'm after is your result in a different way. And for me, I go back to the original recommendations and say if our submission to this was good, if it talked about Councillor Coombe, our plans and strategy, if it talks about sound resource management practice, if it talks about all the things that we value, climate change and all that, it should stand up. It should stand up. And what staff are actually saying, what I'm hearing from staff is, you know, they actually support you too, Councillor. They do. But they're just saying the way to get there is their original process. So in doing so, I support your intent 100%. I absolutely support, but I am not a resource management lawyer, and I have to take that legal advice so that it doesn't cost council money and hope that your outcome will be achieved by the original process of accepting and letting it go through with a strong submission from us.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. And I think lastly, Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually thought we were making a strong argument in the Ōrākei case around sound resource management practice not being part of it there. But so I was willing to put it on the line for that and deal with the legal ramifications. I saw it as a way to, if you didn't trust the process, that you could chop it at the knees with the decision that comes in, you know, before us here. So I really admire what you're trying to do here, Chair. But I wish I could support this, but I can't because I've learnt my lesson from the Ōrākei case. And so I'm not saying yes to development on elite soils. I'm saying yes to a process that will allow, hopefully, the result that you're after to happen. But yeah, I respect your, I can see your activism coming through and I respect that. Mm-hmm. But I learned too much from the Ōrākei case, so I can't support it. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Bartley. Look, I'm not going to take a right of reply. I think we've had a really good debate here and there's been some good points put. It's not appropriate. But there was a comment, Mayor, this is not at all a criticism, but I need to check, because we're on open record here, Mayor, there was a comment that you made regarding what the Chief of Strategy said, which I heard is maybe not quite accurate. And I appreciate that you're online and maybe not have heard exactly the words that she said earlier. So I do need to ask, before I go to the vote, and it'll be by division, I need to ask the Chief of Strategy for the record to clarify, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My apologies if I wasn't clear. The context of the question, I think, was from Councillor Simpson about if this was rejected, you know, would there be costs? Would we be up for costs? So in the context of that, I said that we may well be. Should the court go against, you know, the reject recommendation, that was the context of that answer. I have not said, and I'm not saying that we would have no chance of winning. My answer was to say if we didn't win, then it may well result in costs against us. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll leave that there, and we will now go to the vote, and it's by division. I'll call for the division, please.
Thank you, Councillor Darby. You are voting on the motion before you, which is to reject the private plan change. Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Bartley.
Oh, no.
Councillor Casey. Councillor Casey. Come back. Councillor Cashmore.
No.
Councillor Coombe.
Aye.
Councillor Cooper.
Against.
Councillor Dalton.
Against.
Councillor Filipina.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher.
No.
Mayor Goff.
Against.
Councillor Henderson.
For.
Councillor Hills.
Abstain, I'm sorry.
Councillor Mulholland.
Against.
Councillor Sayers.
Against.
Councillor Simpson. Councillor Stewart.
Against.
Councillor Walker.
For.
Councillor Young.
Abstain.
And I'll just try Councillor Casey again.
Just noting my vote was against, Chair, not for. It's been recorded incorrectly there. Thank you. That's Councillor Sayers.
Declare the motion lost, 4 votes to 10, and we'll now put up the staff recommendation. And I think, members, we can go straight to the vote. And I think if there are dissenting votes, can we record them rather than go through a division? I'll put that. Would somebody like to move, please? Moved by Councillor Cashmore, seconded by Councillor Cooper. It's moved and seconded. Can we please go straight to the vote? All those in favour say aye.
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 To the contrary, no.
No.
And I'll have.
Can you
my
record my vote against, please?
We're recording votes of Councillors Darby, Councillor Walker, Councillor Henderson. Is there anybody else that wants to be recorded? Councillor Coombe. Thank you. That concludes our business on that item.
Expecting a pretty good submission from you, Chair.
Oh, we do have the motion there, don't we? That submission. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Appreciate that, members. I'm very
Excuse
mindful.
me, Mr. Chairman.
I'm mindful of time.
Can you hear me?
Councillor
Mr.
Casey,
Chairman.
we can hear you now, but we couldn't hear you through the vote.
I've been trying to. I don't know what's wrong with this Skype business. This is ridiculous.
So we're in.
I haven't come out of the call. I've been on the call the whole time. I've heard everything. I have been unable to put messages on the sidebar and unable to speak.
I'm really sorry to hear that, and this is an ongoing challenge. And I'm sorry, Councillor Casey, we've left the item, and prior to leaving, we had the vote, and unfortunately.
Okay, well, I would like to use standing orders to record that I was against rejecting, and in favour of the staff advice.
Okay, are we able to do that? We'll minute that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, members, I think we need to go to lunch. Yeah. And we're going to have a 20-minute break. I just want to check. So 20 minutes, does that suffice? Because we've got quite a workload in the afternoon with finance and performance. Members, we just have a bit of an egress issue on this building at the moment. Members, we'll close this meeting and we'll go to lunch for 20 minutes. We'll come back at quarter to two. So adjourning, and we'll come back at 1:45.
We stay online.
Yes, keep this open.